All politics is identity politics. Welcome to Identity Politics, everyone. I'm Kevin DeAnna. Hope you had a good 4th of July. We're going to be talking a lot about what happened on the holiday. But before we get into that, quick thought experiment, because I want to know if I'm the only one who thinks like this. When somebody makes one of these grandiose moral claims, and then they just don't follow it up with any action that seems to match it, don't you just dismiss everything else they say as nonsense? I saw this in the conservative movement all the time. They would say things like, well, Western civilization is on the brink of ruin. Okay, then what are you going to do about it? Like, well, then we need to teach about the importance of free markets, and we need kids to read different books. The pro-life movement and Conservatism Inc., these people are the worst on issues of race and immigration. And they'll go up to you and say things like, well, abortion is murder. You're killing babies. Well, what are you going to do about it? Well, we need to make sure young women don't feel judged. All right, well, if that's the takeaway, I just don't believe what you're saying, and I don't think you do either. And same thing with a lot of these religious leaders. Like, well, the Pope said this, and this minister said this. Why don't you submit? Why don't you listen to him? Well, because they're all hosting councils with each other about how they all basically agree on everything, and the only real sin is to be opposed to immigration or something. So none of them take the supernatural stuff seriously, so why should I? Like, I don't have to listen to any of this. There's just a fundamental lack of seriousness. And let's not let the far right off the hook here. Our own people are on the brink of dispossession. The most evil people in the world want our genocide. It's a plan that's been going on for 5,000 years. So what are we going to do? Well, I'm not going to join anything. I'm not going to donate money. I'm not even going to want to vote because, voting is what they want you to do. But I'm going to make videos telling you how we're all going to die and there's just nothing we can do about it. Great. Glad to have you on side, I guess. Look, what people do matters a lot more than what they say. If some conservative says something like, we're on the brink of communism, we have to do whatever it takes to stop it, and then nothing happens, or they just step aside if they lose an election, then yeah, they don't actually believe what they're saying. And more than that, who people are willing to fight, like actually fight, that tells you more about who they are than anything positive they believe in. Now, I realize this sounds very black-pilled and cynical and pessimistic. God knows I can be like that. But politics is about friends and enemies. And the latter is way more important in building coalitions than the former. You're intolerant about the things you actually care about. Everybody is right-wing about a cause they actually believe in. Everybody is xenophobic and nationalist and intolerant if they want to protect a community they actually care about. No one who actually cares about Palestine thinks it doesn't matter if certain kinds of people move in there. Same for those who think Israel should be a Jewish state. Obviously, it's all about demographics in the long run. But you'll see members of both groups saying America needs open borders and immigration makes us stronger. They don't believe it. Does that make them hypocrites? Not really. It's just that America isn't all that important to them. And why should it be? It's not their country. You advocate universalism and open access for the things you don't care about. You gatekeep the things you want to protect and preserve. Anytime somebody shows anger, starts talking in the language of wiping out and punishing and eliminating, yeah, now we're talking. We see who they designate as the enemy. That's real. We see what these people are actually about. The late Kevin Phillips, political strategist and author, created the GOP's Southern strategy, built the coalitions of Nixon and Reagan, later became a progressive. He summed up the way democracy really works when he said the whole secret of politics is knowing who hates who. That may not be the most noble sounding thing, but that tells you a lot more about really what motivates people rather than who they claim to love. Because love is just a cheap word that people pretend applies to everyone. And if something applies to everyone, it's basically worthless. And this, of course, also applies to our country. The 250th anniversary of the United States of America focuses on one question. Who is America for and who does it belong to? Because if it's for the entire world, then it really means nothing, doesn't it? And you can have whatever celebrations and pageantry and all the rest, but that's just going to cover up the void at the heart of this whole thing. Now, the left, whatever else one might say about them, actually has a narrative about who America belongs to. America is about overcoming white supremacy. It's about equality. It's about universal access. In fact, everyone in the world is an American except the founding stock, except the white people who used to be associated with American identity. America was built by slaves. America's land belonged to the Indians, the Native Americans. In fact, we're on stolen land. It's bad we even came here. A Muslim or an African or both who just came here is not just as American as you, he's more American than you. He's the true meaning of what America is. And the emerging socialist movement in this country takes advantage of this. And it's vaguely associated with, well, economically, it'll be better off for everyone because the powerful or the elite or whatever are responsible for all your problems. But somehow the powerful doesn't refer to those of them who are already in office or who are wealthy or have secure positions in academia or media or government or international organizations or NGOs or any of these sinecures that you and I would kill for. Doesn't apply to them. They're never in power. They're always the rebels, right? It's attractive. You can see why it works. The compelling part of the Democratic Socialists of America's message is that it's really a program of racial revenge. We are going to remake the country. Maybe some whites can get in a little bit. If you do what we say, you guys can be collaborators. But fundamentally, the country does not belong to the people who created it, but the people who are remaking it now. This is being made explicit. So, for example, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani's speech for the 4th.
Nearly a decade ago, I too felt what you feel. The joy of no longer being just a New Yorker, but an American too. You each hold a special power, the power to determine what America means. The powerful have always known their answer. America, in their view, is an arena of supremacy, where only a select few are allowed freedom, where not all are created equal. America, if you ask them, becomes less the more people it welcomes. America, they will tell you, belongs only to those with the right accent or the right shade of skin. The rest of us, they insist, should be grateful for merely being allowed to visit.
Now, when he says that, I thought to myself, yeah, the thought has occurred to me. But then I don't think these people should be here at all. And notice the contradiction here. There's this implicit distinction between who he calls us, and I think the image there shows who he means by us, this sort of nightmare of sullen, overweight Browns that he has gathered behind his desk. A desk he has backwards, by the way. And then those who he says have the right skin color. But this is the whole thing, isn't it? Isn't the fact that he's here and in a position of power and has a coalition of dependents deeply hostile to the country proof that his whole view of power is wrong? Power is on his side. Power has always been on his side. He's never actually experienced opposition in his entire life, from the press, from academia, from law enforcement. Like, these people's whole lives are just an act of charity from us, and all we get is hatred and resentment. But that's on us. If we're stupid enough to follow a value system that gives them power, that's our fault. And implicit in any of these speeches is the recognition that it is a racial battle above all, that it's a battle of identity, but it's somehow illegitimate for whites, the one population that thinks of the USA as our one and only country, to fight back, to have any kind of collective political representation. In fact, what America is all about is dispossessing us. Now, President Donald Trump and the Republicans clearly think that being anti-communist is the way they can salvage the ruin that is the upcoming midterm elections. So President Trump, during his own 4th of July speech, said the following.
Of the American system and the communist system has never worked. Our warriors did not fight communism on battlefields across the world, only to have that menace rear its ugly head right back here in America. We're not going to let it happen. We like to stop a threat like that immediately and before it begins. It's like a cancer. You got to cut it out. You got to cut it out fast.
And I saw a lot of people saying, oh, this is base. This is such a great speech. Here's the problem. The cancer's already in the country. It's not just a tumor. It's in the bones. It's in the organs. It's in the brain. The people who matter in educational and cultural and media institutions, they believe in all of that stuff. And why? One, because for decades, they were essentially allowed to operate, infiltrating our institutions and turning our system against itself. And not to sound like a boomer conservative here, but more or less everything you've been told about Joe McCarthy was a lie. He was right. If anything, he understated the degree of hostile infiltration. And yet this myth persists that it was all just kind of made up. And the myth persists for a very important reason, because during the time when the right could have done something about the universities and the media and the commanding heights of the culture that dictate social outcomes from the top down, they didn't do anything. They retreated to flapping their wrists and talking about the free market or something because they were afraid of conflict. So what are we left with? We get the same narratives where the villains of history are now the heroes. In fact, the actor who played Mike on Breaking Bad, his 4th of July speech was about, of all things, how evil Joe McCarthy was.
June 9th, 1954. How many of you remember that day? Yeah. Right. Well, I do. I was in elementary school, and we had one of the first televisions in the neighborhood, which would have been great if it was tuned into the Lone Ranger. But my old man wanted to watch this boring show called the Army McCarthy hearings. Bunch of guys sitting around talking into microphones. If you've never heard of Joe McCarthy, look him up on the whatever. He was a United States Senator, and he was a real peach. He'd lie, he'd bully, destroy reputations. He would hurt people without a thought. And everybody was afraid of him because he was rooting out communism. And let me tell you, in America in the 1950s, you did not want to be called a communist.
Now, again, we don't even need to get into the history because to some extent, the history doesn't matter. That's not what matters to most people. It's all just television. History itself is just television. It's all scripted dramas. It's all fake. I mean, this guy, like the mannerisms and everything else, this is not a world-weary cartel hitman. This is an actor. This is a member of a trade that the Romans considered accurately equivalent to prostitutes. But now he's going to lecture us on right and wrong. He's got all this wisdom. But the thing is, politically, and think of how your culture is shaped like this and your beliefs are shaped like this actually is the right thing to do. People live by narrative, by imagination. History is a story, and this is a story that people want to believe in. The good guys win every single time. There isn't anyone out there who actually wishes us harm, except the fascists, of course. It's just a question of being tolerant and open-minded, and everything will just magically work out. And this is what conservatives believe. Most of all, probably more than anyone. So when President Trump is up there and he says, oh, it's a cancer, we have to cut it out, this is the worst thing ever. No, I don't believe you. Because if you really thought this was a major threat, you wouldn't just make a speech and then do nothing. Speaker Mike Johnson, head of the endangered Republican majority in the House of Representatives. Same thing here.
The elected system of our government. Ronald Reagan used to warn about communism. He talked about it, that it was a distant threat across the world. And now the barbarians are inside the gate. So this election cycle is for all the marbles, Shannon. This is not your father's Democrat Party. That party's long gone.
The year is 2026. They're still invoking Ronald Reagan. Like, this is what they're falling back on. But forget that for a second. Think of the other things he's saying. The barbarians are inside the gates. Well, whose fault was that? More than anyone, it was Ronald Reagan. He let these people say with his immigration amnesty. And his vice president, later president, George H.W. Bush, opened up immigration even more. Like, this is the actual legacy of the Reagan conservative movement, making communism a mainstream American movement. We didn't win the Cold War at all. Because now it's here because of demographic transformation. And this brings me to my second point. You could probably survive being a bit too tolerant during the Cold War. You could probably let these guys run around in the universities and journalism or whatever else. You can't survive importing an endless mass of sullen dependents into the country who are going to support these policies because it's the only way they can survive, because they can't produce. If they were capable of producing things, they wouldn't have been brought in. So again, think of the rhetoric coming from the conservatives. Oh, it's about morality. It's about an existential struggle. Everything is on the line. This is a threat like nothing before. Okay, well, what are we going to do? You're in power. You're in power right now. You're the Speaker of the House. The barbarians are inside the gates. Make them leave. There was quite a lot of material about foreign money funding Mondami's campaign in New York City. In theory, they could have prevented him from even running. They didn't do anything. Same thing about Ilhan Omar. Oh, we need to denaturalize and deport her. Do it. Do you believe what you're saying? No? All right. Then why should anyone else? What we're seeing from the Republican Party is the same playbook since Nixon. The left is nuts. It's anti-American. It's extreme. Yes, it is. I get it. And yes, the left is a real thing. It's not the elite versus you. No, the left is a real thing. And contrary to the people who tell you this doesn't matter, they know they're leftists. They organize as leftists. They win and wield power as leftists. This is all true. But the Republicans and the conservatives are not actually concerned about this. They just go, look at how wacky this is. Look at how nuts they are. If you want the country to continue, you have to vote for us. And normal Americans go, God, son of a bitch. And they vote Republican because what else are you going to do? Because benign contempt seems preferable to furious hatred. But two things have changed. One, and again, mostly because of the Chamber of Commerce, because of the Reaganites, because of the pro-business, cheap labor lobby, there are now enough hostile nods in this country that you can't count on having the majority anymore. You guys, you replace the electorate. It's not like this wasn't predicted. People warned about it from within the conservative movement. Peter Brimlow, Tom Tancredo, Pat Buchanan, someone we're going to be interviewing in a little bit. They were attacked. They were purged. Here we are. We told you so. And the fact that nobody acted on this suggests that nobody ever actually believed in any of this bullshit about really stopping communism. And the second point, and here's the thing, young people, including young white people, especially young white people, especially young white men, don't get anything from the system. They've been locked out of every job. They don't get the set-asides because of their race or sex. They don't get any help from the boomer conservatives. What are they told? You need to pick yourself up by your bootstraps, even as they're frozen out of good schools, underbid for good jobs by imported H-1B labor, and lectured their whole lives by hysterical teachers and counselors and government officials about what immoral scum they are. And when they turn to the conservatives, when they turn to the right, as they did in historic numbers in 2024, what do they get? Not only nothing in terms of economic help, but usually a stupid lecture about how they need to man up. They need to work harder. Why don't you go to church and be a beta provider for a single mom? Why shouldn't they tell you to piss off? They're right to do it. It is good and righteous and noble that young men want to go on adventures and conquer things and improve their status. I mean, hell, the movie that all the conservatives are excited about right now, Young Washington, it's basically about that. George Washington isn't some timid guy who can't wait to be some sit-at-home loser. He's insanely ambitious. He shoves himself into these social settings where he doesn't belong. He wants to be rich. He wants to be powerful. He wants to have status. He wants to conquer land for its own sake. He thinks it's perfectly fine to kill the people in his way. And this is awesome. This is what the country was founded on. This is good. If this is the hero, why should young white men have to sit there and eat shit? And more than that, why would you not expect at least some of them to turn to the left where they're at least going to get something, if only revenge? What are the Republicans doing right now? Right now, even as we speak, a number of Republicans in Congress are pushing for the Securing Agriculture's Workforce Act of 2026, H.R. 9535. What is that? We're going to modernize the H-2A program for temporary agricultural workers, another legacy of Reagan's stupid amnesty. So, what are they planning on as they go into the midterms? More foreign workers. And of course, since we still have birthright citizenship, this means more nons here to outvote us. But how can we even complain about being outvoted when this is what Republicans want to do anyway? So keep in mind, no SAVE Act, no pressure for mass deportations coming from Congress, no English as the official language, or just any of these 80-20 gimme culture war issues you could do just to be cynical, just to keep your jobs going into the midterms. They will not do it. But what they will go to war for is another expansion of foreign labor. This is what they are. And you could say, well, that's the congressional GOP, not the White House. Now, yes, I'm very fair toward the White House, I think. The White House is doing a lot of good stuff on immigration policy. I'm not blind to that. I'm not going to spurg out over President Trump. But what can one say to this? This from White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt.
To come here right now.
Some of these kids, and I call them kids because they're in their 20s, and they've never had real jobs, and they're complaining things are expensive. Yes, things are expensive when you don't have a real job.
That's right.
Do you think that's getting traction, complaining?
Unfortunately, I do, because this generation, my generation, I hate to say it, Gen Z and those younger than me have been raised with just silver spoons in their mouth, just getting everything handed to them. That's not the values this country was built on. It was built on meritocracy and hard work, pulling up your sleeves, pulling yourself up from your bootstraps, and achieving the American dream. And we need to protect it with all we got.
Is it laziness?
A little bit.
Is it because the professors said the country's corrupt, it's evil, and we just need to shake them down and hand money out.
It's laziness and it's the liberal indoctrination. You bring up a great point about our education system. However, I will say, a silver lining, so many parents that I talk to across the country are homeschooling, are turning to private education, are turning towards Christian schools across the country because they don't want their children being taught these communist and liberal ideas slammed down their throat. It's why President Trump in the White House has advocated so strongly for school choice across the country. We want kids to be taught to love our country. They should. It is the greatest country in the history of the world.
All right. I say, if they misbehave, just make all these young kids join the army, right? Shape them up. I almost had to.
Send them to Cuba. Send them to Iran. They'll want to come back real quick.
That's a good point. They can say hi to the gay Ayatollah. Thank you so much and welcome back, Caroline.
Is there anything in the world more nauseating than someone in Gen Z unironically saying, pick yourselves up by your bootstraps on Fox News and invoking meritocracy? Like, abolish the Civil Rights Act. Then you can talk to me about meritocracy. Meritocracy is illegal in this country. And what was this incredible effort that she did? So now she can lecture everyone about hard work. She got a job with Trump out of college. She ran for Congress and lost, and then got married to a real estate developer 32 years older than her, and now she's the White House press secretary. What an inspirational story. This is not exactly a career path that applies to young men. At least I hope not. Like, she needs to go. She needs to go. This is political malpractice of the highest order. This is a disastrous message. And yet, what is she doing? She's doubling down. So this is a wall of text from her account on X. I'm not going to inflict the whole thing on you. Even this image here, this is just part of it. Don't even bother trying to read it. It just goes on and on and on. But I'll quote a few excerpts here that are important. Quote, I am seeing a lot of bad faith actors take my comments from this interview out of context. Oh, yes. So here's the full interview, and let me expound. My answer, a combination of laziness, yes, and the liberal indoctrination that has been taking place in our education system for far too long. There are far-left educators pumping students' heads with garbage, convincing them that hard work and sacrifice won't pay off down the road because they want them totally reliant on the government instead. I went on to say that's why President Trump is a huge advocate for school choice and why so many parents I know are turning to homeschooling, blah, 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 blah. Let's stop there. Let's be as charitable about this as we can. Like, let's try here. Yes. Obviously, left-wing indoctrination is an issue. Yes, the education system is a disaster. But one, the answer is not to run away and homeschool and school choice. It's actually to take back these institutions when you have power. Notice conservatives can't even begin to think in these terms. Like, what I just said wouldn't even occur to them. There's not a person in D.C. who would even acknowledge that's a possibility. The very idea that you get power and use the state to impose your will, that's just beyond them. Let's start like a little institution on the side and they'll study the Bible and everything else. Yeah, anyone with power is just going to ignore you. And again, Gen Z is majority non-white. Let's talk about the demographics here. You're going to teach them to love America? Why should they? It has nothing to do with them. And this boomer rhetoric of, well, if you major in these left-wing things, you're not going to succeed. You absolutely will. I mean, who runs the show, after all? The guy who gets the real degree in engineering and then gets replaced with an H-1B employee? The person who gets the six-figure job with the NGO after picking up an ethnic studies degree? Like, that's the person who matters. Who matters in this situation? The HR person who decides whether or not you get an interview, or the person who actually learned to code? That person's just going to get replaced by AI. Who has the more attractive career path? Who are young, ambitious men going to want to emulate? The guy who works in the trades and has to fight off constant efforts to be underbid by illegal immigrant labor? Or the person who gets the government job, managing a grant program for daycares or equality initiatives or homeless relief or whatever else, and gets $200K to just sit there all day? Like, what does success in this country actually look like? Let's be honest about this. I mean, you're punished if you actually try to make stuff. These comments are just totally tone deaf. And yeah, to say something rude here, a lot of women, their political beliefs are whoever they happen to be hooking up with at the time. Well, it turns out you marry a boomer. These are the opinions a young woman is going to have. And to be overly fair, yes, and I will say this, yes, she did mention illegal immigrants as a major factor in both jobs and housing. She did say it. I'm not ignoring that. Of course, it was buried in the middle of the wall of text, but she did say it, and it is important. This from Fox Business just came out. Headline, Biden-era illegal immigration drove up housing costs, Fed economists find. Quote, a new Federal Reserve working paper found the record surge in illegal immigration during the Biden administration triggered higher home prices and rents. The findings arrive as immigration remains a polarizing political issue. Republicans argue former President Joe Biden's border policies strained housing and public resources, while Democrats say immigration helped ease labor shortages and supported economic growth. Unquote. Now stop there. That's a pretty big political thing if the GOP wanted to take advantage of it. I mean, doesn't that just blow all the democratic socialism out of the water, just that alone? Here you have the socialists being like, oh, well, we need to stop labor shortages. There's not enough workers going around. We need to support economic growth. No, they're saying we don't want high wages. I mean, you could go to town on that if you wanted to, but we're talking about Republicans, and they just won't do it. To return to the article, quote, the paper, published by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, combines immigration court records with government administrative data to measure how this unprecedented wave of illegal immigration between 2021 and 2024 affected local labor and housing markets. A 1% increase in unauthorized workers relative to a local labor force corresponded with roughly a 1% increase in overall employment. With no evidence the immigration surge reduced average wages. The same 1% increase, however, was associated with a roughly 2.2% rise in home prices and a 1.4% increase in rents. Researchers found little evidence that home building expanded enough to meet the added demand, concluding the influx acted as a housing demand shock in markets where supply was already constrained. The economists estimate unauthorized immigrant worker flows accounted for about 30% of employment growth, roughly 30% of home price growth, and about 20% of rent growth in the average metropolitan area between March 2021 and March 2024, unquote. That's a pretty big deal. Oh, I can't find a cheap place to live. Oh, I can't get a house. Yeah, here's why. You can do a lot with that. But what has President Trump said in the past? At the beginning of this year, this from USA Today. Headline, President Trump says he wants to drive housing prices up, not down. Quote, Trump said at a January 29th cabinet meeting that he wants to make it easier for Americans to buy homes, but not by making housing less expensive. Instead, he suggested lower interest rates he expects from his upcoming pick to lead the Federal Reserve will allow more Americans to buy homes even as housing prices rise. I don't want to drive housing prices down. I want to drive housing prices up for people that own their homes, Trump said, and they can be assured that's what's going to happen, unquote. So, what are we doing here? Now, again, to be overly fair, why is he doing this? Because boomers' wealth is tied up in their homes. Most people's wealth is tied up in their homes. If that goes down, he might lose political support. But if you actually want to make things more affordable for young people, which at some level you have to do if you want to win their support, you're going to have to piss off some boomers. You're going to have to piss off some people who are just being rewarded for buying assets at a time when you still could buy assets cheaply. Instead, young people are being told to pound sand, and then they're essentially dared. Okay, we pulled up the ladders behind us, but what are you going to do? What, are you going to be a communist? Well, don't be surprised if some people decide to be communists. And this whole exhausted, look, we're the lesser evil, you just have to go with us. This was the subtext, I think, throughout the whole 250th anniversary. Yeah, there was a lot of cool stuff. Yes, I'm very happy Kamala Harris wasn't in, but what exactly is being offered young Americans? What stake do they have in the American future? Where is the radical alternative for people who want to step up, who want to do something, who want to build something, who want to have something that is both creating the parallel economic and fraternal and social structures that young white men are going to need to survive, as well as laying the groundwork for a collective political voice? I mean, if there was anyone serious in MAGA, somebody should have been thinking about this a long time ago. But instead, it just orients around pissing off young people for the amusement of Fox News. And I think it's somehow revealing that in the official celebrations, the 4th of July parade in Washington, D.C., which is to say the official parade, was canceled due to heat. We just can't do it. What kind of a message does that send? But some people were able to march on the 4th. So, Patriot Front mobilized about 400 people to march in Washington, D.C. They went in orderly, disciplined, did their rally, Did the speech with no problems? Total success. And this has been the major theme of July 4th coverage in most mainstream media. For all intents and purposes, the actual celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States of America was a march by Patriot Front. That is the reality. Nobody else, including the government, did anything. That was the only group that represented the historic American nation on that day. And Patriot Front leader Thomas Rousseau gave a great speech. I don't see a single word to disagree with here.
While many are content to celebrate independence on this day, we know what these vapid displays conceal. Our people are not independent. Our destiny is shackled to 100 competing nations imported to this soil, bringing with them countless incompatible interests. Our homeland has been turned into a squalid arena of profiteers and invaders, overseen by a spineless cast of traitorous politicians. We wish for sovereignty and liberty which cannot coexist with the conditions that have been forced upon us. A quarter millennia has now passed since America's violent birth, and nothing I can say will glorify independence more than the blood of our forebears that stains this continent, consecrating it forever with the immortal legacy of the men who died for so noble an objective as sovereignty. So we stand on the turning of an age and the making or breaking of our nation's destiny, and we must ask ourselves, under the watchful gaze of history, what is to be done? So dire is our circumstance, so extreme is our condition of peril, that the only way to secure our existence is to become all that we aspire to be. A defeated people was cast into this pit of a century, yet a nation exalted above all the rest will climb out of it. This is our task.
And in the future, we'll talk about the reaction to this more and what some conservatives have been saying. There have been all these conservatives being like, well, no one I know is backing these guys. Well, I'm backing them. Deal with it. 100%. No question. This march was absolutely a triumph. He's right. And so, yeah, just speaking for myself, totally on board with this. No hesitation. Now, people are there dangers with being part of a group? Sure. And if you want to do this whole thing, there's obviously a discussion to be had about tactics and groups and marches. Is this the way to do things? What if you end up on a list? Yes, that's a valid discussion. Sure, there are dangers. Sure, a lot can go wrong. I think there is room for good faith criticism of the approach if you have an alternative. Like if you truly believe membership organizations are going to ruin your life, although what great life are you going to ruin as a young white male in modern America? Fine, make that case. Now, I'm in my own membership organization, right? I mean, in theory, a lot can go wrong, but I said a long time ago, this is what I'm doing, come what way. So I don't believe that. But yes, I will acknowledge in some abstract sense, sure, it's not for everyone. Fine, I do get that. And you could say, hide your power level, infiltrate the government, do normal Republican politics. Why do any of this? You could donate quietly. You could donate anonymously. In many ways, that's really the most important thing a lot of people could do. If the right donated at 1% of the level of the left, we would have won by now. I'm not engaging in hyperbole or trying to make a point. It would all be over. It would be that simple. I mean, 1%, we would just crush everything before us. But that's not the world we live in, unfortunately. Here's the key. Whatever you choose, you understand you have to actually do it, or we just lose. And I'm just not interested in being one of these people who congratulates themselves on being right, that we're all doomed. No one has the right to force you to do a tactic you don't want to. And I would ignore those who say, well, you're not hardcore enough and everything else, because as I've noted in the past, a lot of the guys who are the most eager to shame everyone are also the quickest to break when the pressure comes to bear. I don't think I have to give too many names here, but this is all for another day. And this is one of those discussions that really can only be had among friends. Like, we're just talking to ourselves. It's not the kind of thing you really do in public. We all have to agree on the goal, if not the approach. We have to do this in good faith. And we all have to understand that though some tactics may pose more dangers than others, there's no danger-free way we get out of this. It's just not there. Oh, I'm just going to hide my power level. Well, okay. I mean, you do understand that probably everyone's going to get doxxed someday via AI. Or an ex-girlfriend or ex-girlfriend of a friend or whatever else. Oh, well, I just post under an anon account on Twitter. Well, okay, well, they're probably going to get that if they really want to. I just do mainstream Republican stuff. Okay. How many of President Trump's allies either got sent to jail or had their lives destroyed and their wealth taken? What do you think they would have done to President Trump himself had he not won in 2024 and his family? And that's even if you believe, which I do for the record, I do think it was what it appeared to be, that there wasn't some grand conspiracy to shoot him in Butler. Like, there's no scenario where you're just perfectly safe. I'm sorry to tell you. And look, I'm not telling you guys to charge the guns. I would do certain things differently in my past if I could, trust me. Certain events I was at, maybe it would have been better if they didn't happen the way they did or didn't happen at all. Fine. But sometimes you just got to do stuff. There's no situation where you just make money, do nothing, take no risks, and then we get to magically win and wield power. That's insanity. You're actually going to have to work harder than the other side. You're going to have to sacrifice more than the other side. You're going to have to endanger yourself to some extent, if only financially and socially, if you want to pull this off and have a country of your own. What do you think the founding fathers did? How do you think this country was born? It wasn't by passing notes around, I assure you. There is no scenario where you just get to sit around and watch TV and win automatically. And is streaming that different than boomers watching TV? Is it not just entertainment in the end? It all comes back to the same fundamental flaw that we see with the administration right now. If someone is doing something, it must be fake. It must be a psyop. It must be controlled. Well, no. All this shows is that to many people in the conservative movement, the very idea of doing something, be it a march, be it donating, be it showing up to a city council meeting, or running for Board of Education, even that is just literally unthinkable to them. They can't even conceive of somebody doing something unless they're being paid. And this is also true of the so-called elites on our side. I assure you, there are very few base right-wing billionaires or millionaires out there funding grassroots activism. There are tons on the left. Why? Because they believe in what they're doing. It's not just about money. So what do you have to do? Someone has to put up the flag. Someone has to actually show the alternative for your young white men. The conservatives will not do it. They seem to actively hate the young and hate the very idea of fighting and winning. They just want to be entertained. And yes, I realize the irony of me saying this here. Like, I know this is a show, right? We're on Rumble and YouTube and whatever else. But the point is to win. Like, if you just sit there and watch this and I scream at you and then nothing happens, then this was pointless. Words have to lead to deeds, and deeds include not just activism, but building infrastructure and institutions and parallel structures and bases for collective political action behind the scenes. I promise you that with Patriot Front and whatever other group you have in mind, the things that really matter are not just happening in the headlines. And I know it's frustrating when we talk about conservatives. It's like, do we really have to save these people from themselves with their short-sightedness and their stupidity and their materialism? But I do want to end with a slightly more optimistic idea. Perhaps it's just that they've never been offered anything else. I do think a lot of them are fundamentally good people. But if you have a movement that is built on economic self-interest and people pursuing money somehow leads to the best possible society, and you actually lose if you do activism or political organization, then yeah, it's not surprising you end up with a movement of mediocrities, grifters, and traitors. What do you think was going to happen? But if you build the alternative, if you show them another path is possible, and if you reach out with an open hand instead of a closed fist, I think the best are going to rally to it. We have already seen that young white men will adopt socialism if they are not offered anything else. So is it really so radical to imagine that they will take their own side if someone offers them the opportunity? Because this is the tragic irony about everything we're talking about right here. There was nothing in Patriot Front's message that was extreme or radical or dangerous. It was common sense. It was a reassertion that white people built this country and we have the right to determine our own collective destiny. An American right that cannot acknowledge this objective truth will lose. And if you conservatives, and I speak fundamentally as one of you, I came out of the same movement you did. I came out of the same institutions you did. I know all the same people you know. If you really believe what you're saying about the dangers of communism and America on the brink and the end of Western civilization, the time for action is here. You have to give young men something to believe in and to fight for. And if you don't, then I don't believe you ever meant any of the stuff you said. And more importantly, no one else in the next generation is going to believe it either. It's nationalism or communism. Take your choice. It's the only one you've got. Hey guys, quick reminder before we continue. You can follow Identity Politics on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, and TikTok. And if you want to make sure you never miss an episode, sign up for our email list. If you believe in this work and you want to help us stay fully independent, you can support us directly on Ko-Fi. We offer bronze, silver, gold, and white membership tiers, or you can give a one-time contribution, whatever works for you. Every bit of support helps fund production, research, and our ability to speak freely without corporate or platform pressure. All the links are in the description below. Now back to the show. Congressman Steve King was one of the most important voices in national and state politics, a stalwart on issues like immigration and a rising star, spoke at American Renaissance a couple years ago after he was basically purged and betrayed by the GOP a few years back, lost his re-election bid after being stripped of all his committee assignments. And that's kind of a big deal because if you're in Congress, you need your committee assignments to show your constituents you can deliver. He was basically crippled by his own leadership, and it was over a media hoax. But now the tide has turned, and he's emerging as a real force in Iowa politics again. And the question has to be asked, would he be out of place in the GOP of today? Is he not where the party is going eventually, kicking and screaming, but going nonetheless? That's what we'll talk about today. Congressman Steve King joins us. Real pleasure and an honor to have Congressman Steve King with us here today. This is somebody who has really paid a cost for his political beliefs and who has held true to principle at great personal sacrifice. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks a lot for having me on, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Well, let's get into it for people who might not know the full story. Obviously, you were one of the conservative stalwarts on the Hill for a very long time, one of the leaders on the immigration issue, one of the leaders on a lot of these nationalist issues that have become popular in recent years. But then you were basically taken out by, it seemed like a combined attack from the New York Times and your own party. Let's get into that a little bit, because even at the time, this was a few years ago, it was an interview where you made some comments that were rather innocent and were taken completely out of context and were obviously taken out of context. Specifically, they basically tried to put words in your mouth that you said, like, I am a white nationalist, or like, what is the problem with it, when that was like not what you had said at all. And you would think that Republicans would be a little suspicious of a narrative coming from the New York Times, a hostile outlet. But instead, they just believed it at face value, and the whole party joined against you and drove you out. But now it seems that you might know a little bit more about how that went down.
I do, and I'll speak first to the New York Times story, but then I'd like to dial this thing back a little ways to lay it in a little bit different foundation. But the New York Times story was an interview that I remember it happened on a Friday, and I had texted back the reporter that said that I may be open in the morning, but you have to run it through my communications guy who smelled a trap. And so my phone rang at 8:30. I presume my communications person had cleared the interview, but instead he just called me directly. And sometime about 8 o'clock or 8:10, my communications person had sent me an email that said, don't do the interview. But I didn't see the email because I just got out of the shower and the phone rang. And so that's how that got set up that way. And so in any case, it was a 55-minute interview. And what he wrote in the story was that I had said, white nationalism, white supremacy, Western civilization, how did those terms become pejorative? And then I went on further to say, why did I sit in the classroom studying Western civilization, learning the merits of it, only to find out it's a pejorative term being used? And so, but the way he wrote that was that I had said, and there's a very similar quote that's accurate in the Christian Science Monitor from the same time from me, where I'm pointing out that the word racism has worn out now. They use that. That's that card. They play it over and over again. The whole deck of racism was worn to a frazzle even then. And so now the left had to come up with new pejorative terms. And they're saying white nationalists, white supremacists, but Western civilization, how did that term become pejorative? That was my statement. It was a statement to the Christian Science Monitor in print, and it was a statement to the New York Times reporter.
What I found remarkable about the whole situation is that you were actually doing a bit of investigation yourself to whether this reporter's claim was plausible in terms of him accurately reporting what you said and everything else. And you were actually the one going out there and investigating, whereas the people in your own party were just taking this reporter's story at face value. But as you found out, the reporter's story just didn't hold up.
Well, it sure didn't. And we did the interview. It was a 55-minute interview. And in that time, he stopped me 2 or 3 times so that he could make sure he got the quote right. So he was actually trying, I think, but he was also setting me up at the same time. And I could hear him typing. So I knew he wasn't taking notes. There was no recording. There were no notes. So the only thing that we have left is the article that he wrote and then anything he might have taken with his keyboard. And he said that he could type as fast as I talk. And so I went to the lead stenographer on the floor of the House. They have the magic keyboard. Asked her how fast she can type, and she said 240 words a minute. I said, "How do you keep up with me?" And she said, "A lot of times I don't. I have to go back and listen to the tape recording, and then fix the congressional record because you talk faster than that." And so, in any case, there's no possible way with a normal keyboard that Trip Gabriel, the reporter, could type at the speed that I or most people talk. Nobody can do that. And so, and then another thing that I have him on a tape. We recorded a conversation with him afterwards. And he said, "I didn't think that was going to be the quote that did it." Curious. That would tell you, wouldn't it, that this was going to be a setup. So I dial you back to the general election of 2018, when I was strangely attacked for being anti-Semitic and anti-ethanol, neither of which is true. And so we got into the general election, and a week before the general election, the chair of the NRCC came out and said, people like me have no business in the Republican Party, put a quote out, a press release out.
I remember that, yeah.
And so I was up against the millions the Democrats had, and the more than $1 million they raised for my opponent because of what Steve Stivers said. And his communications director hit me after that, too. So I was fighting the Democrats and the Republicans and the money from both parties. And in that 2018 election, the other 3 Republicans in the Iowa U.S. House lost. I was the only one that lived. Politically, I should say. I spent only $139,000 in that race. They spent millions against me. And by the way, I'd won the 3 previous elections without spending a dime. So on the last minute, we dropped some TV ads out there. I won by 3.2%, not a big margin. But then, shortly after the election, instead of having a wake for the retired Republicans that lost in that race, the governor came out and said, well, Steve King needs to decide what he wants to do, whether it's to represent the people and the citizens of the district or pause, do something else, close quote. Oh, so the leader of the Republican Party in Iowa was telling people open season on Steve King. And the next week, I had Jeff Rowe, who was Ted Cruz's national presidential campaign manager, contact me and tell me and ask for a meeting. And we did that meeting. And he asked for them, and he said, they're going to try again. They don't think that they thought that they could get me to defeated in the election, but they were distracted by the other midterm things, the media. And so they're going to pick a lull in the news cycle. They'll send someone who has the president's ear, and they use these words exactly, someone like a Joni Ernst, Senator Joni Ernst, to tell the president to send out a negative tweet on me. And when that happens, that will be the trigger for all hands on deck, for all the media that they can muster to pour on me. And they believe they can force me to resign. Well, the only difference in that scenario, I guess I'd add to that, I went to see Joni Ernst on the 8th of January in 2019. And I told her that I know what's up. And if they try this, I will blow this thing wide open nationwide. She said she would never do anything like that. And I was happy with that response. That was about 20 minutes to 6 that night, as I recall. The very next morning, Randy Feenstra, the fellow who defeated me in the upcoming primary, announced that he was going to run for my congressional seat. I hadn't even sworn in for that term yet when he announced that. Or I just barely, I guess, technically speaking. So that was announced at 11:23 a.m. on his Twitter account. It only said, I'm going to challenge Steve King. He had nothing set up for a rollout, and he'd scrubbed everything in his Twitter account prior to that point. And so that would be Wednesday. I talked to Senator Ernst, and I presume that message went up the chain, so they knew I knew what was up. The next morning, Randy Feenstra announced he's run against me, and the following day, on the 10th of January, the New York Times story came out. So, they're hard to find a coincidence in politics. This isn't one. And so then when that happened, then Kevin McCarthy then just unilaterally jerked me off all of my committees, and everybody lined up against me. They wrote a resolution to go to the floor of, anti-white nationalism, anti-white supremacy. And I read the language on that. Of course, it was targeted to me. It didn't use my name, and it didn't define me. And I agreed with the language, so I didn't want to divide the party. I went to the floor and said, I agree with the wording in this. I know you're going to aim it at me, but I'm not going to vote against it because I agree with what you put in here. It's artfully positioned. So anyway, I asked the other members, don't die on this hill for me. And but that didn't do much good. And there was nothing I could say after that ever mattered to hardly anybody. About Louis Gohmert stepped up and loaned me some time, his speaking time on the floor, and he was punished for that. Very difficult. That's a longer story. So that they learned, don't touch that guy. What I noticed was that if I'd be on the House floor, I'd just lean on the railing in the back, and members would come by and give me a light little touch on the back and say, "You got screwed, King," something like that. But they wouldn't be seen talking to me on C-SPAN camera. So you kind of understand how that scenario went, Kevin.
I mean, is this something that you think they could pull off today? Because obviously it wasn't if we look at the timing of everything you just said, it wasn't the interview. I mean, the interview was the culmination of something that was already set in motion. So given that you had been talking about immigration, given that you had also done some outreach with European nationalists, given that you had been talking about all these other things, I mean, was it just a pre-planned hit with the New York Times? I mean, because that would be pretty surprising, I think, to a lot of conservatives, especially grassroots conservatives who think like the New York Times is the arch enemy of the movement. But apparently to the Republican leadership, that's basically an ally, or at least a hatchet man.
Well, I think it was pretty convenient for Kevin McCarthy to have that. And so when I was mentioning, we were offline, I think, about when I wrote my book. When I came back from Washington, I wrote my book. It's called Walking Through the Fire. You see it over my shoulder here in my office/library that I have here at home. And I laid out everything I knew. I've long been a prodigious note taker. And so those things were stacked up in my memory marks things too, and I can go find the documentations for it. So what is in that book is entirely true, and no one has challenged a word within it. But I was Diamond and Silk were good friends, and they came to Washington, and we helped them out with some things. And they were sitting in my office, and they wanted to know how this all came down. And so I told them the story, and Silk asked the question, "Who called the hit?" And I had to ask her again, "What? Who called the hit?" And so she meant, somebody called the hit. She knew that instinctively, and I guess my brain didn't process that accurately until she asked the question. So I didn't know the answer at the time. I only speculated. I didn't really even speculate. I just put hints in the book. But what I figured out since then is this, and this is new, I think, to you too, Kevin. When I came home, I see that there was an effort had begun just about the time I returned back to Iowa to set up CO2 pipelines to connect every ethanol plant to take the CO2, which is emitted out into the atmosphere and goes back into the next crop every year. It's a closed loop system. That's natural system, I should say. And they want to connect all these ethanol plants with a pipeline that goes to 42 or so in Iowa, collect them in southwest Minnesota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and North Dakota, and pipeline all that CO2 up to North Dakota and pump it into the ground to sequester it to qualify for that huge subsidy that came in the Green New Deal. And they'd been planning this for some time. But here's what came to me in the short version is that I went to the hearings to protect the property rights of the people whose land was to be condemned by this pipeline. I'm former chairman of the Constitution Committee. I fought the Kelo decision on the floor of the U.S. House and wrote the resolution. So they knew what I would do, Kevin. And I'll just pause for a second and see if I need to fill in any blanks there at this point.
No. I'm familiar with all that. But I guess what you're getting at is that this hit had less to do with immigration and these sorts of things that the media was all excited about and more about. They thought you would stand in the way of this project.
That's it. And so I was sitting in these hearings from August until early November, sometime about halfway through that. I'm watching the people go around through there, and I know the people and the players in the pipeline company, and also on the establishment wing of the party that was part of that. And Terry Branstad was the ambassador to China, former governor in Iowa, longest-serving governor in the history of America, came back as ambassador and set up a consulting company to enhance the business relationships from China to the United States, going both directions. And so I'm looking at this while I'm listening to people plead for their constitutional right to their property, some grown men crying on the witness stand. And I'm thinking, what would I be doing if I were a seated member of Congress today? Well, I'd be out here in the county seat towns. I'd be in the floor of Congress doing special orders. I'd introduce legislation. I would call out every governor in those states, every U.S. senator, every member of Congress, legislative leaders at the state level. You've taken an oath to the Constitution. What's it mean to you? And they would have had to answer me. And I would have killed that pipeline project within 6 months of beating on them through the media. There I am with nobody's paying me to do it. And I'm spending weeks there because I believe that we take an oath, we have to keep that oath. So then my light bulb came on while I'm sitting there. Well, that's why they called the hit.
Right. That puts a whole new interpretation on the whole thing because, I mean, I admit, and I wrote about this at the time and everything else, that, well, this is the guy who is taking the lead on all these sorts of things. I remember a lot of the hostile, triumphalist, frankly, coverage from the left-wing media when he went down where they were saying, oh, we got him. And they interpreted it as an ideological triumph. But in a way, it's worse what your own side did because the left was obviously correct in seeing your defeat as an ideological triumph for them. But for the Republicans, it was like that didn't even matter. It didn't even enter into it. It was just, well, this is an obstacle in the way of making a little bit of money and doing this stupid deal. So whatever. And what happens in the long run with the ideology or with the direction of the country or what this means for the fight over the future of what America will be, like that doesn't even enter into them. I mean, are they really just that short-sighted and materialistic and mercenary? I mean, it's remarkable to think that, but it's not that surprising.
I'd add greedy and avaristic on top of that, Kevin, just to flesh out the adjectives here. But I would take that back. This CO2 pipeline business or this carbon sequestration, that it's all a hoax. It's all cooked up. And I can trace it back, document it back to 2007 at least. World Economic Forum is where I think that was incubated. And then they began to sell that. I traveled in and out of Europe many times throughout those decades. And I debated these issues, Green New Deal or global warming, and name your city over there, I guess you could about say. So I was interacting with the legislators there and just on the ground, listening to what they had to say, arguing back. I actually had debated Angela Merkel in the chancellor's office on this one day. I probably overspoke my welcome in that discussion. So I had that in my background. And then, of course, I'm in Congress and I'm watching the Democrats like Ed Markey get to the floor to talk about cap and trade, which was the precursor to this situation that we have now. So I watched the evolution of that was coming through all along. And I never bought the idea that we could set the Earth's thermostat by sequestering CO2. And the lead on this company that's still trying to do this, his name is Bruce Rastetter. We ought to know this guy's name. I could tell you a long history about him, but I was on the good side of his operation politically for quite some time. And I thought that they were supporting me because of my good judgment. But they were trying to at least rent me if they couldn't buy me. When finally they realized they couldn't do that, so they had to get me out of the way because they were moving their pipeline project. That is the bottom line for this. And by the way, Bruce Rastetter and his people were making fun of Michael Mann and the hockey stick and emails they were sending to me back in those years. They don't believe they're saving the planet. They are raiding the public treasury and establishing a monopoly, a quasi-monopoly, on the highest quality, largest volume of CO2 known anywhere in the world. And I'm standing in the way. We formed two organizations. One of them is called Free Soil Foundation. It's a C3, and we're suing them in court. We're paying the attorney fees all out of our operation here. We've got multiple clients that are part of it. And I formed a C4 so we could lobby in the Capitol and support some races. And so they knocked me down, but they didn't knock me out.
Right,
and I'm back up off the canvas, Kevin.
That's good. Glad to hear it. I remember when I was doing some reporting for a conservative site years ago, talking a lot to Jim Inhofe, and who, of course, is laser focused on all these global warming issues and everything else. And the thing that I never quite really understood until I talked to him and saw some of the stuff his office was putting out was just how much money is in. Because a lot of times you think of it in terms of like, well, it's about ideology and it's government control and globalism and everything else. And it's like, yeah, but for a lot of people, I mean, there are fortunes at stake. And they're just going to go along with whatever argument they need to get, because then you get a government contract. You basically get a dump truck full of money. And whether they believe in it or don't believe it, it's almost beside the point. It's just an opportunity to make money. And it's not even really making money. It's not like you're starting a business that makes things that people want. You're essentially getting a handout. It's just a handout with extra steps.
That's what they've done. And looking at some of the people they brought around here, there's a law in Iowa that says that we prohibit foreign ownership of farmland. That's gotten traction at the national level also, but it's been in place here since 1980. Well, they're condemning private property, private farmland to put their pipeline through. And if you look at the investors in some of these investment companies, I have no doubt there's Chinese money invested in some of it. It's 100%. Threaded within the investment portfolios. Money's fungible, so you can point your finger at that, and I could trace it back. I've written an article or two on that as well. But I made some allegations at a public meeting. I said their partners. Partners are Syngenta and Smithfield, at the time, both 100% Chinese owned. And I named also Paul Singer, the number one vulture capitalist in all of America. Their lawyer came back to me, and while the meeting was on, he said, I didn't want to bring this up publicly, but Syngenta and Smithfield are not investors in Summit Carbon Solutions. Well, no, they're partners in the parent company, and in the Summit Ag is the parent company for Summit Carbon Solutions. So I'll take him technically, but he did not rebut Paul Singer. And I asked that question at 4 different meetings, Paul Singer, and they said they don't know if he's an investor. But I know that he's a business associate of Bruce Rastetter's, because Bruce Rastetter name dropped him to me 3 times in one meeting back in 2013. That's when I brought my focus on Paul Singer.
And isn't he funding like some right-wing stuff now too, Singer? Isn't Singer one of these guys who's kind of like tacked right and trying to like buy certain conservative outlets and putting some of his stuff out there?
He manipulates lots of stuff. And he owns the Washington Free Beacon, so he can launch whatever he wants to media-wise.
There you go.
I've seen the numbers at 21 million. It's reported to me that he dropped $28 million in that election cycle into banks and accounts controlled by Kevin McCarthy. So how could you better control Kevin McCarthy by then doing that?
Yeah.
And so Kevin McCarthy was he was dancing on the strings, I believe, of Paul Singer. Bruce Rastetter did never have the power to make that happen in Congress, but Paul Singer does. And he had a couple extra reasons too. If he's an investor, that's enough for him. By the way, for viewers, Paul Singer is a guy that took down Cabela's in Sidney, Nebraska, pocketed about $100 million, and turned that town into a quasi-ghost town because they pulled everything out of there, almost everything out of there, and took it down to Bass Pro in Missouri. That's one thing he did. He's so utterly ruthless that he bought Argentinian, I don't want to call them quite junk bonds, but they were bonds that, for pennies on the dollar, and managed to impound an Argentinian warship in a harbor in West Africa, an attempt to hold it hostage till they paid him out for the value of those bonds that he would accept. That's pretty cold-eyed and cold-hearted. Took on the currency or the banks in Peru and did pretty much a George Soros there. You could go on with this guy. In fact, I think I should, because there's something really interesting.
Well, he's a force on the right, too. I mean, this is one of the things. Singer, I mean, like the fact that he's bankrolling all these things. I mean, this is the larger point here, because I do want to talk about the immigration thing and where the party's going and everything like that. But there's a really important point here, which I hope people are understanding, that you see the left going after you, for example, and going after you in the most extreme things and everything else. And yes, it's a real thing and it's a real threat. But then on the right, I think people just expect people on the right to say like, well, the left is going after this guy, we need to defend him. But for so many people on the right, or the Republican Party, if you prefer, they're really in government just to make money. Like it's like there's actually nothing there other than like make the money and leave. And so if that's the movement, like, how are you ever going to get anything other than defeat over and over again?
I've lived a lot of what you've just described, and that's accurate. And so I just went a little deeper into Paul Singer because I think it's really important as contemporary.
I agree.
There was, if you noticed, last fall, maybe August or September, we started hearing about the drug smuggling boats coming out of Venezuela to the United States. That was kind of news to me, and I paid a lot of attention to the drug smuggling for a lot of years, but that didn't seem to be the most important thing. And Trump wasn't going after Mexico; he was going after Venezuela. So they started sinking these drug boats, and we didn't see very much of the details of that, but that happened about 30 times, maybe. And so all the while this is going on, Citgo, the oil company, 100% Venezuelan government-owned, operating in the United States with refineries and retail distribution outlets all over the country, as far as I know. That company was valued at around $18 billion. But of all the negative publicity that came against Venezuela and the other problems Venezuela had, admittedly, the value of Citgo was going down and down and down. Who would want to invest in a company? And their market share was shrinking. So they finally got into a place where they pushed a distressed sale. And there were 2 or 3 bidders. Paul Singer succeeded at the number of not 18 billion, $5.9 billion. Now that transaction was, I'll say, agreed to about Christmas time of last year, between Christmas and New Year's. We got over the first of the year, and about the middle part of January, we go in and pull Maduro out of Venezuela. Right. As soon as that happened, Citgo's estimated value, went up. It went up almost somewhere to the area of $14 to $15 billion. Singer could have picked up $10 billion in the transaction of Maduro being jerked out. Then on top of that, we go into Iran, and the Straits of Hormuz get closed. I haven't checked to see what Citgo's worth today, but that's the kind of stuff that Singer's involved in, and that's classic Singer. Now, I don't know if he convinced the president to go into Venezuela and pull out Maduro. I don't know if he has any influence on that whatsoever, and I don't know if he had any inside knowledge on when that was going to happen, but it was about the most convenient thing. If you just say, Paul Singer woke up one morning and he had just bought Citgo the day before and didn't have any idea what to do, you would come up with that kind of diabolical story. Let's jerk Maduro out and my stock shares will go up. And if we go in and knock out Iran, that'd be handy anyway. And the Straits of Hormuz will be tied up for a while, and so I'll be richer still. That's a pretty heavy allegation to make, but I'm speculating on how the man's mind works. This is the kind of thing we're up against here in Iowa, that kind of diabolical thinking that is relentless and will not let up, and he's very persistent and patient. And by the way, he put quite a lot of money into the Obergefell decision that imposed same-sex marriage on America.
Right.
Public and open about that. And
Absolutely.
I'm the only member of Congress that went to the Supreme Court, stood on the steps with a microphone and big speakers, and ripped it into them for ripping up our Constitution and doing what they did to us. So he'd have every reason, personally, I would expect also to go after Steve King, Kevin.
Right. And I mean, he's of a type too. I mean, we remember, I think people forget how dead in the water Mike Pence's political career was before Trump selected him for vice president. Because you remember he tried to do that kind of pro-family bill in Indiana. And then all the business lobbies basically said, we're going to start pulling these things out unless you back down on this thing. And he basically did. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think a lot of Republicans and conservatives don't quite get is that you can have grassroots groups, you can have lobbies, you can have politicians who say they align with this or that thing. But ultimately, it's really the donors and it's the business lobby that calls the shots as far as people who these guys actually listen to. And Singer, as you've pointed out, and I'm really glad we got into this, this is somebody whose influence within the American right has been growing quite a bit in recent years, if you look at the enterprises that he's backing and everything else. So one might be inclined to say, oh, good, here's this rich guy who's backing the American right. It's like, yeah, but what's coming along with that? You're getting support for homosexual marriage. You're getting support for more immigration. You're getting support for a foreign policy that maybe some people don't like. There's a lot. And by the way, you're also getting support for purges against people like you.
Well, and then I would just add that I was attacked for being anti-Semitic by the Republican Jewish Coalition, the RJC. Why would they do that? Well, I'm going to guess that one of the major donors there is the one Paul Singer.
Right.
And there was another fellow who is a Jewish investor capitalist. I'm not sure I could call him a vulture capitalist. His name is oh gosh, if it comes to me, I'll put it back in. Somebody I'd never heard of before set up a pact to attack me in August of 2018. Curious how that would happen.
Right.
So that's this stuff. When you start looking, I think sometimes now in the terms of, the old story, if you're a carpenter and the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
Well, if you're the RJC, everything is anti-Semitic. If you are Bruce Rastetter, any of your enemies are anti-ethanol in Iowa. So that's how that stuff works. And if Kevin McCarthy is dangling on the strings with $28 million, and that's a speculative number, but if he is, then we know who his bosses are. And we know they'll never come clean. And the people that manufactured this story about me, they have to live that story to their graves because it's manufactured. They dare not confess. Not one of them will, I don't think. And even though they'll go to church on Sunday, but they still, and they can't look me in the eye. So I'm having fun in this state. The governor's race is moving along here, and my political capital has increased.
Yeah, let's get into that because, I mean, you're in the midst of a comeback right now. I mean, even to the point of you endorsed in this latest race, you endorsed somebody different than President Trump, and your guy won.
Well, I guess I did that in 2016 when Trump was here running for president, and I got behind Ted Cruz, who won the state
That's right,
Iowa.
Cruz won that, yeah.
So Trump wasn't very happy about that, but I thought he was the clearest constitutionalist, and that's what I was after. I'm very happy with Trump overall. Some things I'm not, but in this race here, my successor in Congress, who defeated me in the 2020 primaries, Randy Feenstra, and he was handpicked by Bruce Rastetter and company. The very people that are pushing this pipeline, they had to get me out, and they had to have a candidate. So that's how that happened in that way. Feenstra has served now 5.5 years in Congress, and he's known across this state as a squishy, spineless rhino. He hid in the basement during the governor's primary, but I'll say that Bruce Rastetter commanded him to run for governor. He didn't really have his heart in it, but they thought they could just spend enough money that he could win the primary and then the general election. And in the end, people just understood that if he wouldn't go out and debate, if he wouldn't meet the people, then we got the sense that he's afraid of his constituents. And he set that record for 5.5 years here or longer. So that's not entirely, it's not made up in the last 6 months. He was the chosen candidate, though, from the establishment class. And he was, of course, endorsed by Trump in the last few days. He was endorsed by the Governor Reynolds and the elitists of the Republican Party. I sat on my east deck here in September with Zach Lane. It's spelled Lahn. It's the German spelling, but it's the American pronunciation, just like the lane to my house. And Zach he was born and raised in Western Iowa, and he was the district director for U.S. Senator Steve Daines in Montana. He was in Washington for a while, and some of my staff socialized with him, know him as a friend. I had his cell number, but I didn't remember my interaction with him, actually. And then we sat on my deck for 3 hours, eye to eye, and it was a fascinating conversation. The depth of this man goes deeper than anybody I've seen run for office, at least in this state. And he's a guy that looks at the horizon instinctively and looks over the horizon instinctively, when the rest of the candidates seem to look in the mirror, see the next governor looking back at them, and then they just push the buttons on their vest that say, I'm pro-life, I'm pro-gun, I'm pro-balanced budget. And Zach has made fun of him for that. So I'm not going to give you those canned answers. And there is only two people I know in public life that if you ask them a question, they actually process the question and give you an answer rather than just a cassette that's in their head from the last time a similar question was asked. Zach Lane is that one of those two people. And so I knew in September that he would be an excellent candidate. He'd make an excellent governor. I didn't know if he'd be a good candidate. And then in January, we did another 2.5 hours, eye to eye, face to face. And I asked myself in the middle of that conversation, can I ever wear this guy out? I kind of make jokes that I usually wear everybody out talking about policy and those kind of things. And I just jokingly say the signal I get to shut up is when their eyes glaze over. I get that too. You start happily babbling about something and you realize the other guy checked out 20 minutes ago. Well, especially among family who think they've heard everything.
Right.
So in any case, I just wonder, I don't think his eyes would ever glaze over on me. And we had to part because of schedule. But he's a fascinating man, and he has depth and intricacies going on in his approach to things. And so I came forward and endorsed him sometime in April. I was moving people into his campaign, kind of back channel stuff, so that he'd have some network to work with. And in the end, he won that nomination by 1,500 votes statewide. And that was pretty tight margin. But Randy Feenster, they could not buy the nomination for him, as much money as they put into him. And now, this campaign, it needs to be built out more. There's a lot more that needs to be done. So it's firing on all cylinders by the time we get to November. Well before then, actually. But he will make an excellent governor. And his opponent is a guy named Rob Sand, who is a fellow that I guess he cut his teeth in the former state attorney general's office when Tom Miller was the attorney general, and then was elected as a state auditor 4 years ago in the 2022 election. And you look at the guy, and he looks like he's maybe 20 years old or so, this Rob Sand. And but he's been campaigning for governor for nearly 4 years. That's what he's used the auditor's office for. And he's married to tens of millions of dollars, and they're putting it into his campaign, and he's working it to raise money too. So this will be an intense race for governor. And then sitting here in Iowa, I wrote an article I just referenced as the domino effect. If I was predicting if Randy Feenster won the nomination, we would have a Biden basement campaign candidate. That's what he was in the primary. And so if you have a flat candidate for governor, Ashley Hinson's running for the open U.S. Senate seat, and that's and that race is important. We've got 4 congressional races here, 3 of which are in, I'll say, purple districts. They're hanging in the balance also. You can go with the majorities, the numbers. We'd lose seats all potentially in the Iowa House and the Iowa Senate. If that cascades across the state, if we don't have a highly active, intense gubernatorial Republican on the ticket, we could lose the U.S. Senate seat. We could lose 3 U.S. House seats. We could lose seats in the Iowa House and the Iowa Senate. But if those 3 seats that I mentioned could make the difference in a majority in the U.S. House, and if we lose the majority because of that, Donald Trump's facing 2 years of impeachment, and it would just be a handcuffed government all the way through. So I want this governor to win, and I want him to have big momentum so that we can sweep through and restore those, or hold the seats that we have and hold the Republican seats we have. Right now we have 2 Republican senators and 4 Republican House members, no Democrats at the congressional level in Iowa. I'd take a little credit for that if somebody offered it.
Yeah. I mean, you would think that the party would give you a bit, well, maybe this is what's happening, because when you talk about how they turned on you and everything else, you've always been somebody who put the movement first, ahead of your own ambition. And, as you say, even voting for that resolution because you didn't want to split the party. You didn't want to cause a problem for everything else. And it's not like the leadership gave you any credit. But when you think of what's happening now, it seems like the people in your home state are giving you some credit because your political capital is rising.
Well, I get requests to endorse candidates from all over the state, and get invitations for speaking engagements from all over the state. And when I endorsed Vivek Ramaswamy last cycle, even against Trump, because none of the other candidates would answer the constitutional property rights question with the CO2 pipeline. Vivek Ramaswamy did. And he told us in a public meeting that a very high-ranking Republican said to him when he was preparing to come into Iowa for the Iowa presidential caucus, come to the Iowa campaign, if you will, talk about anything you want to talk about, but don't talk about the CO2 pipeline. That's Bruce Rastetter. And we could not force an answer out of Donald Trump, Nikki Haley, or Ron DeSantis on where they stood on property rights in the CO2 pipeline. We sent our team to them, and that's hand-to-hand combat in politics here in the Iowa caucus. You could shake every candidate's hand without a lot of effort. And when we had them there with tape recorders, we couldn't get an answer out of those 3. So I think those 3 concluded, okay, I won't talk about the CO2 pipeline. Right. That's Bruce Rastetter's request. That's a piece of power. You can pay people in political donations to get them to say certain things, but I've never seen anybody that had the influence that they could tell presidential candidates and a former seated president, you do not talk about this topic. And so I wanted to flesh that out, and Vivek Ramaswamy did a great job of that. Zach Lane also is on that same standard that we're going to defend the constitutional rights, and these guys that want monopolies to raid our treasury, we've got to fight them.
It's really interesting how so much of where we began this conversation talking about ideology with immigration and all these sorts of things, accusations of white supremacy and all the rest of it, but really it comes down to money, at least on the right. But we should talk a little bit about, the left-wing reaction to you, because you were the one I think they hated more than anybody, at least after Tancredo got out of the House. And I think that they really thought that they got a scalp when they got you and everything else. But now, if you could somehow duplicate that, same interest, same motivation behind everything. I mean, obviously you don't have McCarthy any in there anymore, so it would be totally different on that front. But I don't think they could pull off the same kind of hit in ideological terms. I think that even if they took comments out of context, even if the New York Times tried to do its whole thing, the reaction among normal conservatives would just be, he didn't say anything wrong. What's the problem here? And that's something that's changed pretty dramatically just within the last few years, because these sorts of things used to force Republicans into a defensive crouch not that long ago. Now they're still defensive, but they don't react with that kind of primal fear that you used to see in their eyes when issues like immigration would come up. Am I being too optimistic here, or do you see that same kind of progress too?
Well, there's been a shift, and I was one of the, maybe even the first real example on that. But Donald Trump has done a lot to change this too. I mean, he's taken on the press directly. He said some things that caused me to kind of grit my teeth just a little. Right. And even when he said the thing with Billy Bush about grabbing by the, he said, I said it. He admitted it and got elected. So he's really helped clear the path so that we can be more honest with this. But I don't think they could pull that card again. And people know what that is. And then often I'll get more like occasionally I get asked, what would I do differently? And it's a pretty simple answer. I would do all the same things I've been doing. Those subjects needed to be brought up. They had to be brought into the Overton window before we could fix them, and they weren't. So I was intentionally dragging the political center to the right and towards the Constitution. I knew that was my job, and I made that promise before I was nominated for the first time. But what I'd do differently I'd tape record every conversation.
Yeah, right. I was just going to say, that's obviously the lesson there. I mean, you can't. If there's one thing I wish I could tell people, because I went much smaller stakes, obviously, but you can never take the word of a reporter. There's always an agenda. They don't do an interview unless they have a goal for that interview. And if you're on the right, the goal of that interview is usually to make you look bad, at the very least.
Well, and so instead of having a senator that I mentioned earlier go to whisper in Donald Trump's ear and have that be the trigger to the ambush, they used the New York Times to do that on me. That was the trigger. So the hit was called to the New York Times. I'm going to guess that was Paul Singer that was most likely the one that did that. And
that's interesting.
And Trip Gabriel, in that same conversation I said we recorded of him, when he said, I didn't think that was a quote that was going to do it. That's pretty much confirmation that he was set up to hit me on that. And I was of the same thought because I intentionally gave him a quote that should have infuriated them. And in that interview, he asked me, when you look over at the Democrats on the floor of the House, what do you think when you look over there? And I answered him, no country for white men. That should have been.
That should have been it. Yeah, that should have been it.
But so he probably thought the same thing.
It's really interesting. And it's interesting that Singer would have been behind all this thing too. One thing that we obviously need to talk about that just happened pretty recently was this birthright citizenship decision. Now, again, to try to be somewhat optimistic about this, it wasn't that long ago when the very idea of it going before the Supreme Court, let alone getting some votes in favor of striking it down, would have been unimaginable. That does represent some growth. Now it's an issue in politics. People can campaign on it. There are people trying to introduce legislation. But that's frankly a cope. I mean, this was a pretty devastating defeat, I think. And it's especially frustrating because you've got majority Republican nominees on the Supreme Court, and this is what we get. So what's your take on this decision? Did you anticipate it, or did you have some hope that they were going to strike it down? And where do we go from here? Because birthright citizenship's the whole game.
Well, that executive order was, I thought Trump produced almost my entire wish list for a president in the first 36 hours of his presidency, that among them. And yet it was always suspect that it was going to be litigated. We knew that. Looking ahead on it, see, I had authored the birthright citizenship bill, the ban on birthright citizenship, or automatic citizenship, I should say, back as far back as 2011. And then I introduced it every 2 years, all the way up to the time I left Congress. House File 140 we kept the same number each time. So I was engaged in that. I'd had John Eastman come in from out in California to testify on why birthright citizenship was not a constitutional requirement. And those same arguments emerged before the Supreme Court. Justice Thomas must have been really livid about this decision, because he wrote 91 pages in dissent, which I haven't gotten into yet, and I really want to read that. So it's, I think it's a terrible decision. I know at that time we looked at an 1898 case. Some would say that was on point, called the Wong Kim Ark case, who was the son of Chinese immigrants who were apparently lawfully present but would never qualify for citizenship according to the laws at the time. And they declared the born from them, the Wong Kim Ark, the son, to be a citizen. Well, it wasn't really on point because they weren't illegal aliens. And so I had made that point many times in the past. Here we are with a blanket decision. We don't get to argue with Wong Kim Ark anymore, saying, well, they weren't illegal aliens. Illegal aliens now are embraced by this 5-4 split decision, the majority of the court. And he looked at the picture of that, and it was the 4 women and the not so very masculine John Roberts on that one. I mean, he's the guy in the middle that swings the swing vote, I guess you could say. And I was really disappointed at that decision. And now what that does to us, it says you're going to have to put up with illegal immigration, the birth tourism industry, and it is an industry, right? And unless and until we amend the Constitution, and the degree of difficulty in that today is so high, the bar it's unclearable at this point. So we have to bring other enforcement in, and we should be waiting there at the airport when the Chinese officials send their pregnant wives, and when they land and go, you're pregnant, you don't get to come into America. And by the way, accelerate our deportations and focus them with intensity. This should trigger a full court press on deportations of all kinds. We've got to do everything we can to control what's going on in this country. And if you look at even the decision, the exceptions still exist. The sons and daughters of diplomats, they have diplomatic immunity. They are not citizens by policy today. If you are invading an occupied army, and any babies born to them are not citizens today. Well, that hasn't been happening, but if it does, that's a clause that the courts have recognized. And the third one is subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The clause in that, all persons born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are American citizens. Well, that clause, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, was a carve out for Native American tribes who were more sovereign then than they are now, and they might lose their membership in the tribe if they were automatically citizens. So that was what that was for. And the birthright citizenship that's in the 14th Amendment was specifically so that the babies born to newly freed slaves would be American citizens with all the status. And it was the right philosophy, the right thing to do. But then it became a practice and a habit. And now it's so pervasive that I just think the members of the court and many others can't get their mind around what would it be like if we stopped this, or what would our country be like if we had never started it?
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, especially with Roberts, because obviously you got the 3 liberal women are going to vote for it because, frankly, they see their political interest in it. Amy Coney Barrett, I think, just doesn't have I think her, I'm trying to put this diplomatically. I don't think she wants to appear mean. I think like that's the legal principle here. Like she just doesn't want to be mean. But with Roberts, it seems that because remember, Roberts was the key vote to save Obamacare. I mean, this is not the first time he's pulled some stunt like this. Roberts seems to think that his job is to maintain the court's legitimacy in the eyes of basically the New York Times and the liberal establishment and things like that. And so the reason I think he voted the way he did is not because of any legal principle, but simply because people would be really mad at the court if they threw out this thing, because rightly or wrongly, it's been perceived as standing policy for a century. And he just didn't want that fight. But the problem is, they're already talking. I mean, Gavin Newsom is already talking that if the Democrats take power, they're going to pack the court anyway. They're just going to expand the number of justices to ram through whatever ideology they want. So this idea that we can somehow hang on to legitimacy by giving the left what they want on like the really important stuff, but maybe we can kind of goof off on the margins, it's still not going to work, because at this point, I don't think the left recognizes the legitimacy of any American institution if it gets in the way of their power. They're willing to go all the way.
Well, it's pretty interesting. They are, and when I saw them, they just sacrifice their majorities to get Obamacare passed. I mean, that was a big and nasty fight, and we picked up 87 new Republican House members in the 2010 election. That was a reaction to what they did, but they were able to force it on us. And that's when John Boehner and I got really crossways with each other, and Eric Cantor. Those guys, John Boehner said, well, I've got a lot of tricks up my sleeve, and I will make sure that we play those tricks, and that means Obamacare will never be implemented into law. And I've heard that stuff before from you, John, and you didn't follow through, and you don't have that many tricks up your sleeve. And so I started pushing it hard, and I wrote the repeal of Obamacare and dropped it on the floor with 66 co-sponsors within about 48 hours. And Michelle Bachmann dropped her own bill. Turned out they were identical to each other, and we just worked together on it. And the two of us fought Obamacare harder than any other pair of people, maybe harder than any other person in the United States Congress, House, or Senate. And we agree to this day that if we had one more person that would have worked that hard, and Louis Gohmert did a lot. There were others in that group too, but as far as the people that lived it day and night, it was Michelle and it was me, and her dynamism helped us push that thing hard. But still, we came within one vote of killing it. Now we're stuck with it nearly forever. So it's
and it was McCain who voted in favor of it too, right? I mean, in the Senate. I mean, that to me was just. I mean, this is. I just got to ask you, as somebody who's seen it from the inside, because, all right, John McCain campaigns against Obamacare, runs for president. Yeah, I mean, he does all these things. It's like this whole record is, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to get rid of it. Then it gets to the point where they can get rid of it, and he says, "No, I'm going to single-handedly save it." And you look at it and it's like, well, what does he gain from it? I mean, even just from a political self-interest point of view, like, I don't get it. And I find myself coming back to the only reason that he would do such a thing is basically spite. That there's kind of contempt for his own side, maybe for people like you, maybe for people like his voters. Like he fundamentally does not want to be liked by the right. He really just wants reporters or liberals or whoever else to think like, oh, well, he's one of the good ones. I mean, that sounds so flippant, but I have a hard time explaining the conduct otherwise.
You saw my reaction when you used the word spite, Kevin, and that was the word that was hanging in my brain as you were asking the question. I go further with this, though. I mean, my bill was repeal all of Obamacare. It was awfully short, and it said as if, and every regulation, everything, as if it had never been enacted. That's as concise as you ever get on do a repeal, as if it had never been enacted. Well, so that bill went to the floor multiple times. I never got to floor manage it. I never got credit for it because they were working around it. They had decided they didn't want me to get any credit for anything. I can tell you longer stories on that. But then Paul Ryan, then you had some people that are saying, well, we want to save the 25-year-olds so they can stay on their parents' health care. I wanted them out of the house. I didn't want them dependent. And we want to do, let's see, whether it is prescription drugs or something. I've forgotten. There were about 2 or 3 pieces there. And they kept saying, well, we have to preserve this. And I'm saying, rip it all out by the roots if you think it's a good idea. If you want to sell insurance across state lines, I'm all for that. Bring us a bill that does that.
Right.
We had the solutions laying out all over the place, and we got socialized medicine instead. We could have ripped it all out, and we had the momentum to do it. Paul Ryan kept pulling things back in, and he wrote a convoluted bill that I guess I'll say at a time, I could have told you what I thought was in it. I got to ask him today, and I'll bet you he can't describe what's in that bill. And that's the bill that that John McCain voted no on, and that's how I get to this word spite, because I think he had spite also for Paul Ryan.
Really? That's pretty interesting. Why against Ryan? I mean,
I was wondering. I don't have it in my memory this morning on what that is, but that's I
just kind of like petty personal stuff, just whatever little
it
slice.
Just seemed like it was policy clashes and things like that, and for some reason I knew at the time that there was bad blood there, but I can't remember what the issue was now. But I do remember the guy I couldn't mention. Seth Klarman is the one that set up the pack to attack me in the late summer of 2018, and he might fit into a similar profile to that of Paul.
Right.
So just to put the market down for the record, that's my memory did dial that one back up.
That's good. Well, this leads me to a bigger question, because I look at let's be blunt. If you look at the Republican Party going into these midterm elections, look, historically, the president's party loses just because that's how it goes. And they're going into this buzzsaw. Everybody's concerned about affordability and inflation, all these sorts of things. And there are these measures, particularly the SAVE Act, which basically has unanimous support on the right to pass this thing. And you've got majority support among the larger public, and you've got the president lobbying. And I'm always told, like, oh, the president runs the Republican Party like a dictator. They just do what he says. Well, he keeps telling him to do it, and they won't do it. And you look at the inaction, especially in the Senate and everything else, and what strikes me is how self-defeating it is. Like, people will say things like, well, they'll do anything to stay in office. But my view is, if they wanted to stay in office, if for no other reason than they just want to stay there, you would think they would vote for this, but they won't do it. It's almost like they don't want to give their own people what they want, even to the point of being self-defeating, even to the point of losing office, which strikes me as completely insane. So, like, what's going on there? Because, again, I can't. The only thing I can think of, again, spite, that could be one of it. But another thing, as you suggested, is that a lot of times, maybe when we look at these fights over ideology and everything else on the right, maybe there are some sort of financial things taking place behind the scenes that we just don't understand. Maybe they're setting themselves up to be on a corporate board or whatever else.
Well, those are all the legitimate speculations, I think, Kevin. And I've, of course, watched that swirl around me. This bill, this Save America Act, is set to be able to be passed. And all they really need to do is call it to the floor of the U.S. Senate and have enough Republicans there to vote down the motions to adjourn and just wait for the Democrats to wear out.
Right.
And it would eventually that will happen. They've got, 2 or 3 different senators that are lame ducks now that are digging in. Mitch McConnell would be one. Tillis would be another. There's a third one that doesn't. Oh, Bill Cassidy. Those 3 are all lame ducks. You've got Murkowski up there that's pushing back on it, because if you remember right, the most amazing thing happened in Alaska when she lost her primary to was it Joe Miller. And they mounted a machine in the not technological age, by the way, when she was first elected, that vast landscape of Alaska with all the little Eskimo and Inuit villages all over the place you have to fly to with single engine planes, and they don't have cell phone coverage. And they managed to teach enough of those people how to spell Murkowski in a write-in campaign to get her to the United States Senate. So she's protecting that in case that ever happens again. There's some kind of machine built up there in Alaska that I just scratch my head at how they ever pulled that one off. So those are 4 of them that are bucking this. And I think all it takes is one of them to come around, and they've got the numbers. And at that point, there will be no excuse for John Thune not to bring it. But for me, I would say, let's just play guts poker, match the pot or drop. We're going for it. And if you want this on the history of for your reputation, for your legacy, then go ahead and kill this thing and be the lone person that does it to any of those 4. I would just stare them down and do it, because at some point it doesn't pay not to. You lose if you don't move, and so at least you've got a chance to inform the public on it. I would put that thing on the floor, and I think that's what John Thune should do, and that's what Mike Lee thinks ought to happen too, by the way. And he's the champion of this.
I guess that brings up the larger thing. McConnell, who knows? I mean, you're hearing reports today that he might be literally, and I'm not saying this is a slur. I'm saying, like, I'm seeing this in the news, that he might literally be brain dead right now and in the hospital. And nobody really knows what's going on. So what exactly are we doing here? And then you have Tillis, who really seems to have shown his teeth ever since he's not going in again. I mean, speaks with unbelievable spite and bitterness against his own supporters. Cassidy, I believe, was primaried basically by Trump and was lost. And then Murkowski, as we pointed out, Murkowski is her own thing and has never really been on the right at all. So when you have, especially from like McConnell's point of view, or whoever's running the staff, or somebody like Tillis and everything else, I guess the question is, what exactly do they get out of it? Because this is, to me, is always the great mystery to a lot of the people you see who are Republicans in Congress, because the Democrats tend to, they move as a block. I mean, they vote monolithically for this kind of stuff. The idea that they would oppose a Supreme Court nominee, regardless of how liberal they are, like, you just never see it. They just follow orders and they do what they got to do. But with the right, it's almost like, to them, being in government is a means to an end, and the end is not exercising power or passing good legislation or making a stand for whatever. It's almost like they see this as an opportunity to either move out and get a better private sector job at some point, or to sort of like grandstand to the people who don't vote for them. And then why? Like, what do they get out of it? Like, what am I missing here? Because it's so politically self-defeating that I can't explain it rationally, and yet you see it over and over again.
I don't know if I have a good description for that. I've scratched my head a good number of times on why rational thought doesn't apply. I start with the Constitution. Wouldn't you conform with the Constitution just instinctively and honestly? You take an oath to do so. And then I go to the Republican Party platform, look at that. And they say, many of them will say, we disregard the platform. That doesn't mean anything to us. That's just something the grassroots do. And we can let them do that to keep them pacified. What we care about is the donation checks.
Do they actually put it in that term?
Yes.
You don't need to quote it. Wow.
Yes.
That tells you a lot right there, doesn't it?
And I said, well, I believe in the platform. I go to the conventions, I bring planks in, and I debate them, and I nurture others to do the same thing. By the way, that is my role in life now, is bringing good, young, solid conservatives into political activism, empowering them to the extent I can. That's actually the basis of what I'm doing, plus fighting to defend the property rights. But so why else do they do this? Sometimes they're just part of a network. And that network can be the lobby, it can be interest groups, it can be other senators or House members. And I remember that one of the reasons that I ran for office the first time to the Iowa Senate was a bill that was coming to the floor of the Iowa Senate. It was called a parental notification bill in Iowa then. It was the earlier years of what we were doing to try to preserve innocent life. And my state senator had been there for 24 years. And the definition for parents in that would be notified would be not consent, but notified, was parents, legal guardians, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, and either the whole or the half blood. And that's parents. So you could send a letter through snail mail to your half sister you've never seen in Arizona and go kill your baby and don't have to tell your parents. So I got a hold of that, and there was an amendment that was going to be offered. I called my state senator and said, you need to support this amendment, which defines parents as either parents or legal guardians. And later that day, he called me back and he said, sorry, I couldn't be with you. And I said, that's a life or death issue. Why? And after 4 or 5 questions, finally, he couldn't answer. Finally, he said, that's just not the people I vote with. That's what happens also in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. House. They just get to voting in pattern with people, and they just say, well, I'm comfortable in this zone, so that's how I'm going to vote. But I don't think that explains it all by any means, but I think it's an element of it.
Yeah, that does explain a lot of it, though. That's interesting. They're just part of this little faction, and then that's just how they roll. And they don't have to think. I mean, in a way, it makes it easier because then you don't have to think about stuff. You just kind of look at what everybody else is doing.
I found out, unfortunately, that there was one member that always followed my vote. And when I ran down to the floor to vote, they had switched the order of votes. I knew how I wanted to vote, but when they switched the order, I voted wrong on one of those 2 bills. And he approached me afterwards, angry that he could always trust my vote, and this time he's embarrassed by what he did. Well, so was I. And so, okay, I'm flattered by you following me all this time, and I regret that you put up a vote by mistake. So do I. But I'm happy to give a fuller statement and explain this for you. No, that's okay.
Yeah, right. Do more harm than good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked about some really interesting stuff here about how it really works and everything else, but I do want to say that a lot of it has been, maybe some people will find it depressing or cynical or everything else, but I do think if you take a step back, and I want to get your thoughts on this, do you think that the party, the conservative movement, the grassroots right, whatever you want to call it, is moving in a more positive direction, that we are actually getting somewhere here? Because a lot of people are going to say, look, there's no point even trying. It's rigged. There's nothing you can do. They're just going to get bought off by donors or whatever else. And frankly, some of the stuff that we've talked about might even lend support to that. But then other people might say, look, you actually can win these sorts of things. And even if you look at what's happening on the left right now, where you have a more or less hostile takeover of the Democratic Party by the socialists, I mean, if they can do it, could you not do it on the right to the Republicans? I mean, do you see the masses moving in that direction, or are we just kidding ourselves?
Well, there's a lot of things overlay all this. I'll just remark briefly that we are in a global war battle, ideological battle, to say Western civilization against the red-green axis. That's just there. And the World Economic Forum wants to manage the world economically by being able to click the mouse and call the shots. All that pushes back against our civilization. America, the United States of America, is the flagship of Western civilization. And if they can sink the flagship, the entire fleet goes down. There's no question how that plays out afterwards, I don't think. So that's a big component of this. The elements within this, and I'll say the assault on our civilization writ large, is part of the organism that brought Donald Trump to the front. And it produced him in a lot of different ways. He's done a lot to bring this thing to the conservative direction, but that doesn't mean that he's completely free of all those other influences that are taking place. Moneyed interests will always have access, and access equates into action. I'd like to take a lot of money out of this, but one of the points I made on Tucker Carlson's interview here a couple of years ago now was I'd done the math, and I'm not confident in my numbers any longer because I think I actually redid them and found I could have had some better numbers. But I was there when they did a quick draw and brought a bill to the floor that was agreed to, House and Senate bipartisan, to change the election campaign funding finance. They capped the amount that members could collect. What is it now, 3,500 or so, and they opened it up for parties and political for PACs to speak of. That gave leadership the ability to raise something close to $200 for every one that a rank and file member could raise. And on top of that, then they want to tax your $1. If you want to be on this committee, you have to write a check for $400,000. That all grew while I was there. It didn't exist when I arrived in 2003, at least to my knowledge, but they grew that. And it grew under McCarthy, it grew under Eric Cantor and those things. And so the tremendous power at the top of leadership attracts all that money too. And I think the only way you can spread that out is to spread that money out. And that means you have to cap the money going into the control of leadership and let the members be in control of it. And then the idea that you have to write a check to party leadership so you can be sitting on a committee, that's just nuts. It's a bribe to give you a position. And from my standpoint, I wrote a couple of smaller checks to the party. I thought it was my job earlier in my career, and I went over and made phone calls for the party and did those things, but it wasn't very effective. And I looked at it and I said, I represent the platform, and that's what you want. Nobody has to give me money to get reelected. I'm taking care of myself, and I'm pushing the Constitution and the agenda that we are here to advance, the party platform agenda. I'm the free guy. Wouldn't you want to have as many free, not burdensome members of Congress that are carrying out the will that's pledged to all of us? And instead, they didn't like that because some of the things we talked about here. So the influence, there's way too much money in the top. And that's the money is access. And I even looking at political campaigns where the manager creates a bubble around the candidate, and the manager wants to manage the candidate. And then he decides who gets to talk to the candidate and what the subject matter will be, and perhaps even pre-rebuts the subject if he has to open the door to a topic he doesn't want the candidate to hear. I experience these things, and so it's all part of the organism of it. And I don't know if anybody's written about it effectively or with articulation. I don't know if I could even speak to it that way myself.
It's really interesting. So that really does come down to the money in the end, and it's just a question of stopping that, cutting it off, or overcoming it with sheer weight of votes and grassroots enthusiasm, which I guess is possible, but certainly a tall order.
I'll give you another example is that in defending the property rights of the CO2 pipeline in South Dakota, which our Free Soil Coalition, we reach into South Dakota, North Dakota, and a little bit in Nebraska and Minnesota. But we've had a real focus on South Dakota and their politics. They created a prairie fire issue up there 2 years ago that said, we're not going to have eminent domain for CO2 pipelines. And 4 different entities in South Dakota said no. These property rights Republicans, the conservative ones, the constitutionalist ones, they unseated 14 Republican legislators who had been voting with Bruce Raster and that pipeline. And they brought in new leadership because of that. So they passed a bill that banned eminent domain for CO2 pipelines, and it passed with veto-proof majorities. I did a long conference with some of them here just late last week, and learned that there were 16 constitutional conservatives who were defeated in the primary just last month in June, that all that money had come in and it had recruited candidates and got behind those candidates. So they reversed the position that the prairie fire that was created by we the people, by the popularity of the grassroots people, they defeated that with money this last cycle. And now that pipeline company is poised to go back into South Dakota and try to reverse the law that protects the property rights of the people there. That's what money does. We knocked them down with grassroots, and now they come back with more money. And a lot of that money was distributed by Dusty Johnson, who ran for governor. He's he's currently a member of the House. He lost the primary, but boy, he changed a lot of seats with the money he distributed.
Right. So if you want to understand what's going on in politics, the ideology matters, but really follow the money.
That's the first place to look, and then look at all the tentacles that grow out of that. That's right, Kevin.
All right. Well, Congressman Steve King, thank you so much for. Oh yeah, go for it.
Can we do one more thing before we sign off?
Of course.
Okay, because I had a little thing in my head this morning. I got into an argument with Grok, and I do that sometimes.
Yeah, me too.
I can be driving down the road, and to keep me awake, I'll start an argument with Grok, and we do the audio version. And their eyes never glaze over, by the way. But so I was just thinking that the Supreme Court decision that automatically guarantees birthright citizenship that we talked about. So I just laid out a hypothetical. People really need to know how bad this is. If a baby's born in the United States, that baby is an American citizen. Michelle Bachmann and I stood on a little knoll over the Rio Grande River at Roma, Texas, and watched as the shift changed between the Border Patrol opened things up, and they brought this inflatable raft over with a woman that looked to be about 7 months pregnant in it. They brought her over to shore and got out, helped her onto shore with a little ditty bag, and then they floated their boat back over to Mexico. We made sure the Border Patrol knew that. Well, that baby is an American citizen today. I just guarantee it. But we saw it with our eyes. That's a microcosm of what's happening millions of times. And so I got to thinking, how bad is it if they can sneak into America and have a baby? What happens if you land a plane and you say you have a layover in Chicago and you're on your way to Toronto and you're flying out of China to Chicago to Toronto, and a woman goes into labor and has that baby in the layover at Chicago? Well, that baby is an American citizen. Some people will be shocked to learn that baby's an American citizen. So I dug deeper. And what I learned is that if that plane is in American airspace, right, the baby's born, that's an American citizen. So then I go back and I say, well, then this is an opening. They have about 500 birth tourism companies in China. Testimony points to that number. 500 companies sending Chinese pregnant women over here to have babies. And a lot of times it's the leaders within the party, it's the leaders in the military, it's the people that will raise that child to be communist, Chinese Communist Party through and through, and they become then the fifth column that comes back here. And by the way, they're flowing into the United States in big numbers. So I thought, well, I'll just take this to the extended hypothetical. If you would just outfit an airplane with all the medical facilities you needed for the OBGYNs and load that plane up with however many Chinese women are due for their cesarean, fly it over Alaska, even the Aleutian Islands, and just have those babies as fast as a scalpel will move. They're all certified. They're all American citizens. That's just how ridiculous it is, the Supreme Court decision. And I'd like to have been able to make that argument to some of those people like Ketanji Brown, who probably be wondering.
She wouldn't understand it.
No,
she wouldn't understand the argument. She wouldn't understand what the problem was. But I mean, maybe it would get through Roberts' head, but who knows? I mean, unfortunately, I think an editorial from the New York Times patting him on the head probably means more to him than any legal principle or common sense.
Yeah, he's a little sensitive to that. One more little anecdote here while we're having fun, Kevin. It seems like you may have another minute. There was a time when Chief Justice Roberts remarked in the press and more or less complained that the U.S. Senate confirmations of Supreme Court appointments is too political. At the time, my Senator Chuck Grassley was the chair of the Judiciary Committee, and he is again now, I think. But so after he heard that criticism from Roberts that their confirmation's too political, he went to the floor of the U.S. Senate and gave a speech, and he just essentially said, Chief Justice Roberts, when your decisions cease being political, so will our confirmation process. And that was right on target. So about that time, maybe a month later, I found myself at the Library of Congress for one of those evening dinners with the keynote speaker being Chief Justice Roberts. And the table they set me in was right next to the little round stage he was on. And so when his speech was over, they said, does anybody have a question? The guy was behind me that had the microphone. I just raised my hand. He put it in my hand, and I told the narrative. I heard your speech, Chief Justice, about the politicization of the nomination process and confirmation process. And I heard Senator Grassley's, and I told him what the speech was. And I said, but I never heard your answer. And so he gave about a 3-minute response to that. And I leaned to the guy next to me afterwards, and I said, what'd he say? And the answer I got was back, I have no idea. It was gobbledygook. But at least I pinned him down on that one, the political decisions in the Supreme Court. But I don't think it changed anything, Kevin.
No. And it's certainly, I'm not sure that the framers intended for every single political decision of consequence to be made by the Supreme Court.
No.
But this is where we're at. Well, Congressman King, thank you so much. Where can people find you and how can they support you? Because you've been talking about what you've been doing with this pipeline issue and everything else, but where can people find you? And talk a little bit about your book, too, so people could find that as well.
Yes. First, I'll say where I'm very active now is the Free Soil Foundation. The website's just freesoilfoundation.com. And that website is built out. It's got a lot of material into it. You can really look into that and find out what that is. In my book, just go to steveking.com. That's about all I use that website for anymore, is I'm still selling a few books through that. So there's two ways, steveking.com or go to freesoilfoundation.com. And that's where we're raising money for attorney fees to sue these greedy people that are trampling on our constitutional rights. And by the way, the process that we're through, we start the lawsuit about due process and dinky little things, and the very last issue you get to decide is your constitutional rights. And so you sit here, you're a little old lady that inherited the farm, and you want to hand it off to your kids, and they want to put a CO2 pipeline through the middle of that thing and wreck your life's work. And you have to go through 5 years of litigation to let a judge finally say, you have these constitutional rights here. And we tried to bring legislation that put that question first instead of last, and we were beaten by the lobby. So freesoilfoundation.com, that's where my head and my heart is now. I do a lot of other things too. But my book, Walking Through the Fire, tells the story of the path that I went through in Congress. It takes you all the way to the point where I didn't know who called the hit, but now I do. And if you're listening to you today, Kevin, they know your listeners know the answer too.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was incredibly interesting. I definitely learned a lot today. I really appreciate you joining me. Congressman King, thank you so much for joining us here today and for everything you've done for our country.
All my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Kevin.
So this rather amusing situation up in Maine where you have Graham Plattner, who is probably going to be dropping out of the Maine Senate race, or he's going to stay in and just infuriate everyone. Now, this is a guy who has been plagued by scandal since the beginning of the campaign. They all tried to go after him about the neo-Nazi tattoo and, I didn't actually know this was an SS tattoo and whatever else. Now, of course, I don't particularly care. But it is kind of funny that the same people who will try to ruin your life for doing like an OK symbol, or you were at the wrong concert, or you had the wrong optics years ago, when one of their guys is running for the Senate, now it's not a big deal. Now there's context. Now we can explain it away. The takeaway from all this is like none of the moral outrage was ever real. It's always been kind of fake. It's always been about status. You don't have to take any of this stuff seriously. And it's the same thing with what's taking him down now. So he's been plagued by these accusations that, he was sexting people he shouldn't have been sexting. He was on this app that minors use. He had this thing and that thing. I mean, cheating on his wife, that's practically par for the course in politics today. So that almost wasn't even a scandal. And there were all these accusations that he acted inappropriately with people. They blew it off. They blew it off. They blew it off. But now, suddenly, there's one that everyone is saying they have to take very seriously. Even Hassan Piker was like, yes, I'm going to furrow my brow. This is very disturbing. Now, of course, if you've heard this account, there was an interview. You had this, I hate to be uncharitable, but rather unattractive woman saying that she had this complicated situation with Plattner. And again, isn't it kind of funny how it's always like a complicated situation? It's never like, he did this. He's a criminal. He's a piece of crap. It's, it was complicated and it was years ago and there were all these things going on. Okay. But this is going to be enough to force him out. What changed? I don't think it had anything to do with believe all women. I don't think anybody's more compelled by this story than anything else. It's probably just a function of the poll numbers. It's probably just a function that they didn't think this guy was going to win, and now they're going to try to take him out and sub somebody else in. Sort of the same thing they did with Biden and Kamala, right? The point of all of this is I know there were a lot of people who were saying like, look, this guy is like breaking the Overton window. He's getting some optics in there. He's shaking up politics. There's something to be encouraged with all that. I get the argument for that. But at the end of the day, the images and the optics and the arguments about Me Too and everything else, they were never the point. Nobody ever believed in any of this stuff seriously, except the people who are just cooked by the media and are just meat sacks animated by electronic signals. The same people who seriously believed that Brett Kavanaugh was like a rapist based on crazy accusations from years past didn't think that Graham could do anything wrong a week ago. And now these same exact people are like infuriated and offended and, I'm very morally troubled about all of this. The takeaway here is you don't have to believe any of this. Morality is a will to power. These scripted dramas are just meant to get you to act politically in a certain direction. None of it is its own thing. None of it has to be taken seriously. You don't have to go along with any of this. Whenever anyone is trying to appeal to your emotions, or to guilt you, or to appeal to pity, or say this person is a victim, always remember this. All they're really saying is, I want you to act in this way so I can have power over you. That's it. You don't have to take anything seriously except power. I'm Kevin DeAnna. We'll talk again soon. All right, guys, that's it for today's episode of Identity Politics. If you found this valuable and you want to see more of this kind of work, here's how you can help. First, follow the show and share it with people who need to hear it. We're on Rumble, Odyssey, YouTube, X, TikTok, and you can also grab the RSS feed. Sharing it is the fastest way for us to grow. Second, sign up for our email list so we can always stay in direct contact no matter what the platforms decide. And most importantly, if you believe in our mission and want to keep it going, please consider supporting us on Ko-Fi. You can donate once or subscribe at the bronze, silver, gold, or white level. Every contribution, big or small, helps keep Identity Politics independent and alive. All the links are in the description below. Thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting. We'll see you next time.